Hello, Namaskara, Bengaluru, Namaste, India, good afternoon, Asia. Welcome to the sixth edition of ITSM India podcast. Today we have a distinguished guest, quite popular and very well known. We call him, before I tell him about his name, let me introduce him. He's a distinguished speaker in leading forums, CXO, and he writes regular blogs in CIO, CXO forums. He's a keynote speaker in several of the ITSMF conferences. The recent one that I attended was in Wellington, where he talked about unleashing creativity. And he runs the IT Transformation Institute. Any guesses? So he's none other than our favorite Charlie. Welcome to this edition of ITSM India podcast. How are you doing, Charlie?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks a lot. So today what we would discuss for our viewers in India is, and as of course, IT is going on a tremendous transformation. And sometimes I feel this transformation is an overdose. We tend to consolidate everything as transformation. So tell me from your perspective, how have you seen the IT landscape changing gears? Just on a summary note, from where you took off in your IT journey towards what you see today.
So basically you're saying I'm nothing but hype and hot air, is that it? So I run an organization called the IT Transformation Institute, and you say there's too much hype about transformation. Actually, the funny part is I agree with you. When we started my organization's actually been around for 17, 18 years now. We changed our name about 3 years ago. And when we did that, just 3 years ago, it was very few people were talking about the idea of transformation. And in fact, I just wrote an article for Information Week, CIO Insight, one of them, and I talked about the fact that when we started, the question we got is transform, why, and into what? And now it's a foregone conclusion. Everyone is talking about the need for transformation. But to your point, it has hit this hype cycle, and most people are attributing the term transformation to stuff that isn't truly transformative at all. But let me give you my perspective on why we're in this business, why we are issuing this call for IT organizations and really business organizations as a whole to lead this transformation. I believe we're entering this era in which the fundamental landscape is changing, that IT used to be the sole source provider of technology to the enterprise. We were manufacturers of technology. And over the last 10 to 15 years or so, we've been through this gradual but rapid transition in which we really don't manufacture technology at all. We retail it, we buy technology, we package it, we create customer experiences. And if you look at this, there is, through the proliferation of technology and truly the ubiquity of it now, there's no way that IT as a function can manage all of it. And so the IT function is in this massive transformation where we're becoming much more narrowly focused, I believe, on only those elements of the technology stack that provide distinguishing or value that is differentiating to the organization, and that all that other kind of run the business kind of technology is going to be run by the Salesforce.coms of the world and Googles of the world, and that's perfectly okay, and IT has to kind of get out of that way. So if we start looking that forward, then it means that some fundamental shifts in how the IT organization is structured, organized, run, and the kind of skills that we're going to need amongst IT professionals to live in that world. So I think it is, as much as there's this hype, it is truly a fundamental shift that we are in the midst of.
Right. So coming to a point where looking at IT, which is about, let's say, 15 to 17 years old, to be honest. But in my opinion, and this is just like to be a little critical, is IT behaving like a pampered child, crying for attention? Because we are talking about manufacturing, we are talking about other domains that has been in there, they have got all this stuff. So what is IT trying to do? Are they in the kind of craving attention to get that? What's your perspective of IT?
I love your perspective on this. So first of all, I think actually the modern IT organization has been around for about 45 years from the dawn of the modern mainframe. It's an interesting take. I think that in a lot of ways we have been in a perpetual state of adolescence as an industry. We have been very young. That said, I think that if you look at what is really going on, IT is an interesting organization. So I've spent a lot of time, in fact probably half of my time, with non-IT executives, with people, COOs, CFOs, a bunch of different folks in different elements of the business, talking to them. And what is fascinating is IT is in fact unique. I think we a lot of times want to whitewash it. Oh, IT is just another part of the business. It's not true. IT touches everything, every single element of the business, and in this day and age, every single part of the business is both powered by technology, and if there's going to be any kind of competitive differentiation derived by the organization, it's going to almost certainly come from technology or be underpinned by technology. So I think the IT organizations are, on one hand, are whiny, and to the extent that we're going, oh, if you just listen to us, if you just pay attention to us, that part, that's gone. Just forget that. But from the standpoint of understanding that this shift is different and that both the ramifications and the impacts to the organization are going to be felt uniquely and I think exponentially within the IT organization are in fact true. And so all that means to me, though, is that if you're an IT professional, the stakes just doubled. Because not only do we have to figure out how to cope in this new world, I talk about the fact that we're going to this fast world, but we also have to cope and compensate for the fact that the business itself is changing. And that means all the demands, if we think demands are tough on us as IT professionals today, wait for 5 years. They're going to be exponentially worse and more challenging, and we're going to have to be even better at our jobs to have any hope of keeping up.
Right. Coming to the IT, and you have been doing consulting, coaching people, a lot of IT leaders today. What are some of the common challenges that the IT leaders face today in terms of coping up, be it for profitability growth or stuff like that? And what are some of the common challenges? I'm talking about across geographies, and if you have any specific perspective across Asia and stuff, we'll be loving to hear. But what are the common IT leaders' challenges?
So the very first thing, I think it's an interesting word you chose, because we tend to use the term IT leader as a synonym for IT executive management, and I believe we're entering an era in which that is no longer true. I believe that, so let me answer in 2 ways. I think for executive management, they've got a significant challenge. For major IT organizations, there's 2 fundamental shifts that are going on. The first is we have a massive talent gap. We have the middle management layers, and every organization I talk to calls them something different: the sticky nougat, the cement layer, the quicksand layer. I've heard all kinds of terms, but there's this middle management layer in these large IT organizations that nothing permeates. You have IT executives at the top that have great sense of vision. When I talk to them, nothing I say to them is rocket science or brand new, that they understand what's going on, and they can get it down into their organization. And then below that middle management layer, you have people that are frustrated. They see what's happening. They want to be a part of the change, and they can't get through the morass that is these large organizations. So we've got a massive talent gap and a structural gap within these organizations that we have to fix. We literally need to tear apart these organizations, retrain everyone on management skills. We need to reset hierarchical structure. Structurally, there's massive issues going on there. I think secondarily, we also have this issue where we've historically viewed this hierarchical model that leadership came from the top, and that everyone within, you could have IT organizations of thousands of people, and they just did what they were told. And I think those days are gone. I think that, and I want to actually talk specifically about how I think this plays in India, at least from the outsourcing service provider perspective of it. But I think we're entering this space in which every single person in the IT ecosystem stack has to see themselves as a leader. They're going to have to step into that role willingly and not expect that things are going to flow down. And that's mostly because we're entering what I call the ecosystem era. That it is companies like a lot of the ones in India and really all over the world now that are becoming this really broad mesh network of service providers that are providing 80% of the services that the average Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 firm are consuming. And they're being meshed together. And so that means that not only do I have different skill sets that are needed within the IT organization itself, but how the service provider organizations are operating has to change, because it's not this one-dimensional contractual kind of relationship that we've had in the past. So, it's massive change all the way around, in my opinion.
And in coming to a key point that you brought in terms of the talent gap, and I'll bring a perspective in India, right? There's a lot of IT talent pool, and they shift from a company to company. And the single most recent from a statistics standpoint is you don't have a good manager, because of which I'm moving out to another organization. Right. So what is your kind of recommendation or some insights for an empowering task force? I mean, we all know that the IT is actually struggling to have a retention of the best talent pool. So what would be your insights towards that piece of segment?
Probably the most important thing, if I'm an executive or a senior manager in any kind of a service providing organization today, the very first thing I have to recognize is to segregate or separate the skill set disciplines, meaning that I need to have a technical track for those people that are and this is particularly true. So I think this is actually less true in a traditional enterprise IT organization. But if I'm in a service provider organization, I need to separate. I need to have a track for my technologists, the people that are the dyed-in-the-wool, technology-driven folks. They're the bits and bytes, the propeller heads, call it what you want. They love that stuff, right? I used to be one of those people, but I'm not any longer. But there are people that have no desire to be in management. But see, here's the problem, right? We take these people, they're great technologists, and if they want to make more money, if they want to have more stature, if they want to have a higher level of being looked at more positively, the only choice they have is to promote into management. And the reality is that those people are typically very bad at management. Right. And so we need to create two different classes, if you will, and these are equal but different classes, the management class and the technologist class, and we need to create a pathway for technologists to continue to move up, where they can get promotions, where they can be rewarded, they can be recognized, and their skills can be leveraged strategically across the organization, which is separate from our management track, which is trained in management skills. Because right. You're right, people leave because they have poor management, and the management skills, are, from a technology perspective, are almost the complete antithesis. Right? A good manager is one that is more focused on what you're trying to get out of your career, and empathy and emotional intelligence and all this other stuff that a technologist, not only does he not even understand, but could care less about. So, I think that's probably an acute challenge for a lot of service provider organizations today.
Very, very well said on that. And that brings again to the point that an aspect of any transformation for that exercise requires a holistic change right from the top to the bottom in terms of percolation, which brings a point of management of organizational change. Tell me, from your experience and insights, how much of organizations give importance to the concept of management of organizational change in terms of investment of time, effort, training, enablement, understanding the emotional curve of people? Let's be honest. Are organizations on the way? I know Karen Perez talks a lot about balanced diversity. And just give perspective of where are we heading from a management of organizational change.
Well, certainly, almost none do enough. But I think that the good news is there have been enough failed attempts that people are starting to recognize that they have to invest in this. Mm-hmm. They are starting to recognize that they must be deliberate about it. I think here's the hard part: is that the easy stuff is the easy stuff. The stuff that actually makes a difference is the hard stuff. I'll give you an example without naming names. We were working with this one client, so we have an entire methodology, no rocket science here, but an entire approach that we help organizations when they're going through from an organizational change perspective. And one of our first rules is, look, in most organizations, you already have everything you need within it to accomplish your goals. You just have to get out of their way and unleash it. And so we're working with this one organization, and we said, okay, we want to go and get line folks, right? Not management, literally people on the ground doing the work. We want them on the teams, and we want them to lead these teams. And the CIO stopped me and looked and says, Charlie, my team, my people are not smart enough to do that. He didn't trust them. Right. And I think it's this fundamental challenge, right? The hard stuff is, it's easy to go put people through organizational change management training. It's easy to do, go take the John Kotter rule book, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's all right. That's easy. The hard part is true organizational change requires investment. It requires people to believe that change is possible, believe that change is going to happen, believe that they, in fact, are empowered. In fact, that idea is even wrong, that they are given the opportunity that they can empower themselves. And the only way that happens is through trust, and probably the most important thing, and I think that this is a challenge for a lot of large organizations, is the willingness to allow for failure. The willingness to allow people to go into this and make some mistakes. Not huge mistakes, not bet the business mistakes, but to make mistakes, to learn from them and grow from them, because that's the only way they become comfortable in themselves enough to lead change forward. And so, I rely on a book called Switch by Dan and Chip Heath. It is a mastermind book because it's so easy to digest about what it takes to drive change. And at the end of the day, it's this very simple process that you have to get people engaged, and you have to address all three sides: the emotional, the rational, and the environmental. And that's what has to happen, but people aren't willing to do it most of the time.
Right. So again, if you bring from a point that allow people to manage failures or allow that it's okay to fail, but then brings a point here. If a CIO, I know I'm not going to point a name. There's normally the CIOs are for about 2 to 3 years. Definitely they have a slot. They need to prove themselves what the previous CIO did not do it. So their margin for failure is bare minimum. So giving that context of mind, how do the CIOs embrace allowing people to make that stuff of failure? I'm very pragmatic to look at what is really doable in the market.
So can I tell you? Here's my honest opinion of this. That is a complete crock. Sorry. And here's what I mean by that. And not so much you, but this attitude, this belief that, because I think you're right. I think a lot of CIOs come in and says I have no margin for error. I will argue that with some exception, Target maybe being one of them, right, that recently, generally speaking, CIOs do not get fired because of failure. They get fired because of a lack of success, right? And that maybe seem nuanced, but here's the thing. At the end of the day, if all I worry about is not failing, then guess what? I will go contract with Google and Amazon and Microsoft because they've got that wired.
Correct.
Right? But the problem is if I go to those organizations and rely on them for my technology stack in its entirety, I am guaranteed mediocrity. The best I will ever have is the exact same thing my competitors have. So what I want as a business executive from my IT leader, my IT leadership team, is the ability to harness technology that's going to give me strategic and competitive advantage. And here's the thing, cell phones have proven this, and we forget it, right? How much failure rate does a cell phone have over a traditional landline? Right? Comparatively, we won't even compare it. Yet,
Right.
Who here would say that I would rather have a landline over a mobile phone? Nobody. Because the mobile phone gives me competitive advantage in every different way that I'm willing to trade every single day for the consistency that a landline provides me. Business executives will make that decision every day if we give them the chance. If we focus on how we can provide strategic competitive value to the organization, we will win, and they will allow for those failures to occur because they're getting something of value that outweighs the cost of that failure. Right? Obviously, it can't be catastrophic. You breached all of your security and you released all your customers' credit card statements, you're gone. But in the general scheme of things, we have, at the end of the day, to me, it's courage. Executives have to exhibit enough courage to focus on the things that are truly important, not on covering themselves.
Right. Coming to IT business, earlier we used to talk about IT business alignment, then we talk about integration. How far are we close? Are we different? What are we trying to achieve? And one of the common comments people say, and we all agree, is the IT talks about IT axioms, which they don't talk about the business language. Now becoming all prudent and other stuff, what's the real gap? What does it take to build that a cohesive ecosystem of IT business? Now, what is your thoughts?
So I actually think that there's a whole bunch of these concepts that I completely disagree with. IT business alignment, IT integration, the IT broker models, I think they're all hogwash. So one of the things what can I tell you? One of the things I don't think you mentioned is that I wrote a book called The Quantum Age of IT, Why Everything You Know About IT is About to Change. And in it, I lay out 5 organizational traits and 5 skills that the organizations and the professionals of the future need to have. One of those traits is that I believe what we need to aspire to is that IT leaders and IT organizations need to become intimate with their customers. And here's why I think this distinction is important. The concept, and this is, I'm an author. I love words, so words are important to me. Alignment implies this, that I have 2 things that I'm trying to keep together. Integration says I have 2 things, and I'm trying to keep them somehow connected.
Right.
Let me ask you this. If you have a spouse, if you have a significant other, do you seek to be in alignment with them? Do you seek to have an integrated life with them? No. What we seek in those kind of relationships is what we call intimacy. And intimacy means that I live in your life, you live in mine, we live in our lives together. We understand each other, we understand what our aspirations, what our goals. You don't have to tell me that if I don't do the dishes at night, that's going to upset you. I know that about you. I know that's part of our relationship. And you know that I expect the dang towel to be not lying on the floor when I get up in the morning because you've been in the shower, right? I understand those nuances about our relationship. What our customers want is intimacy. They don't want to have to tell us their requirements. They don't want to have to manage this through an SLA. What they want is that we understand who they are, what their goals are, where they're going, so that we can help them get there without them having to ask us or tell us what that looks like. And to me, the classic example that we should all aspire to, that I quote all the time, is Steve Jobs. People forget that when the iPad was announced, everyone, the pundits, all slammed it. They said, hey, we've been here before. Do you guys remember the Newton? We've proven there's no market for a tablet, right? This is ludicrous. Then it comes out, becomes this wild success. Everyone is obviously proven wrong. And so this reporter is interviewing Steve Jobs and says, so, Mr. Jobs, what research did you do that told you that this was going to be successful when everyone thought it was going to be wrong? And Jobs famously said, none. It's not the customer's job to know what they want. That's where IT has to get to, when we have a degree of intimacy that we can understand our customers' needs before they can even articulate it. And if we get to that point, we will never, ever, ever hear the words alignment or integration again.
Excellent. I think you brought a very fantastic point about intimacy. Don't wait for the customer to tell what you want. Just know your customer better than what they themselves know. And it's a very fascinating point that you have for viewers in India as well and across. Quantum Age of IT is a fantastic book taking about whatever you think about IT will change. And that's something which is very true in perspective. Now, coming to the IT world, and this is with recently, I was in the 614 conference, and Landesk provided a Shadow IT souvenir, and there were some few thought leaders who shared their perspectives about Shadow IT. And I want your perspective. You have hit on the word of Shadow IT. What is Shadow IT in your opinion? And just for viewers, Shadow IT is people, the IT has got restricted software. This cannot be installed, so the people just go there and install a Skype or some other productive devices, productive apps for improving their day-to-day jobs. So what's your thought about Shadow IT? Are we going to embrace it, or is it kind of a distant dream?
Yeah, so I was happy to contribute to that piece of work by Landesk, and I think Shadow IT. So the very first thing we have to recognize is that Shadow IT is a construct that IT has in our head, right? It's only in the shadows to us. To them, to our customers, it's what they had to do to get around us to get their job done because they perceived us as being in the way. So the very first thing we have to recognize about Shadow IT is that, right or wrong, leave all that aside for the moment, Shadow IT is an indictment of the relationship that you have with your customer. If they feel they have to go around you, if they have to sneak in the shadows to get the job done, then you've got a flawed relationship with them. And whether it is warranted or justified or not, you have to accept that and come to them with humility to say, for whatever reason, whether we deserve it or not, you don't have enough faith in us to trust us with this, so I want to understand why. Step one. I guarantee you have that conversation with your customer with that degree of humility, their whole perspective begins to change. Right. The second thing I think you have to recognize is that there is a mixed bag here. There is a lot of what happens in the world of quote-unquote Shadow IT that, in my opinion, should be the spotlight put on it and left right where it is. There's a whole bunch of stuff that IT has no business trying to run. Again, as we reach this level of ubiquity with technology, we in the IT organizations cannot run it all. So we need to be very careful about looking at it and saying, does this pose a security risk? Does this pose some kind of a vulnerability? And if so, can we mitigate that through policies and procedures versus owning it? And how strategic it is to the organization from a standpoint of, is that data that is residing in that system needed elsewhere in the organization? This is where I think we have to start looking at ourselves as organizational stewards. Again, one of the things that I've mentioned is that IT is in this unique position that we cross the entire organization uniquely, really, to most organizations. Because in these large organizations, finance even tends to be stratified by division or business unit, except at the very, very top. So IT is one of the few organizations that has that broad perspective to be able to understand that, yeah, you know what, yeah, you're using Salesforce.com, and Mr. VP of Sales I know you think that information is only valuable to you, but production needs it for production planning, and marketing uses it to judge the effectiveness of the marketing campaigns, and finance uses it to do financial management, right? We need to make sure that data comes out, and so therefore we can help you ensure and protect the needs of the entire organization. That's a conversation, but the one thing I will say is that any IT organization, any executive who wants to go in and strong-arm that away from them is only going to compound the problem, because that existed to begin with because of that broken relationship, and you may be able to pull rank and come in and take it back, but if you do that, you will be simply multiplying the underlying core issue, and you will live to fight this battle another day, and it's going to be much more brutal when you do. So you need to approach it with humility, approach it with this a statement that it reflects the state of your relationship, and seek to solve that and to fix that relationship first, and not worry about the technology until you get the relationship fixed.
Excellent. Now, just shifting gears, and one of the things that I see a lot of posts in Back to ITSM, James Finister did start about how do you build a global ITSM community, right? And it's not confined to people who are active in social media and few stuff in terms of these conferences that held up. There are a lot of people behind the behind the scenes who are doing pioneering job, real practitioners who do not have a kind of a voice, to raise. And that brings an interesting point that during SM Fusion, 13, and also with Ping 14, the SM Congress part that emerged. And I know you were quite passionately driving that aspect of that. So what is SM Congress, and what does it bring to people who are not within the social element, but they have a passion for IT service management or to contribute to a wider knowledge sharing? What does it bring as avenues?
So I think this is a story that is being written as we speak. So first, from context, I am the president-elect of ITSMF USA. At our annual conference, which we call Fusion last year, we convened a group that we originally called the RevNet. And this was really just a group of industry thought leaders that we brought together and gave them a blank canvas, said, we're going to provide you a space for 2 days, we're going to feed you, and we want you to think big thoughts and see what happens. And literally that was it. And out of that, they this group, which I'm not even sure where I stand in it, so I guess partially leading it and partially participant with it, but this group ended up recasting itself as the SM, or the Service Management Congress, and issued this call to action. And the basic underlying theme was this, is that we're concerned that too many people around the world in our international community have taken a very dogmatic view of service management, that they've lost the essence of what we're really trying to achieve with service management and the essence of how to go about achieving that. And instead it's, well, ITIL says, and it's by the book, and on all this. And so this call to action was really a statement that said we need to understand what we're really all about, and put that out there. So it started to take on a life of its own, and frankly, I don't know why I say it's floundered, but we've been struggling to figure out how to make it real. So the latest manifestation that came out of Ping 14, a group of us reconvened there to talk about, well, what should happen, what should come next. And one of the concerns that was raised was that, hey, it's great that a bunch of pundits got around and talked about this, but what about the people that live and breathe this every day? And so the idea is to reshape SM Congress into an international consortium of sorts that represents not only the traditional ITIL domains like ITSMF, but also folks like HDI and SDI and probably ASACA and anyone that has some involvement with the broader service management space, and to bring them together in an attempt to reach out to the actual day-to-day practitioners to find out where are the gaps. What part of this makes sense, doesn't make sense, isn't working, so that we can figure out as an industry what we can be doing to kind of answer this call to action that the SM Congress put out 8 months ago. So that's kind of what's going on with it, and it is, like I said, it is definitely still a work in progress.
Right. Thanks for that. So now coming to one of the points that you talk about, the president of ITSM of USA, I just almost wonder how do you manage all these moving parts, just traveling and then doing that stuff. But there was an interesting post on Back to ITSM where when the announcement of Fusion 14 results were announced, there were mixed opinions in terms of people a little frustrated, nothing happened, no response. and stuff like that. So just wanted to understand I know Fusion 14 has got some fantastic speakers. I saw yesterday the schedule out. So how is the Fusion process works, and how many nominations do you get, and how much the number of the slots, and what's the communication back to the people who aspire to be speaking on this conference, just to get your sheer insights on this particular aspect?
Well, clearly the communication hasn't been good enough because we continue to face this challenge, and we are, in fact, I've been trading emails back with folks this last week on what we can do to fix that and streamline that in the future, both in terms of how we communicate with people that have submitted, but also with the submission process itself and trying to get a broader perspective on it. But, you know, all that said, you know, we're always going to have disappointed people. We have a total of 80 speaking slots available. And we have, in addition to a handful that we reserve for things like Axelos and whatever, we have typically 500 or more submissions for those 80 slots. So we're guaranteed that we're going to have, you know, more than 80% of the people that submit are going to be disappointed that they weren't selected. In addition, I think Jack Probst, the current president of ITSM USA, issued a blog post, an article that kind of described what does a winning proposal look like. And we have to recognize that there's a lot of factors. The first thing is we look for 40% new blood, which is someone that hasn't presented for the last 3 years, every year. We don't want the same people presenting,
right,
you know, time and time again. So if you have presented in the last couple of years, you're already kind of, you know, have I don't want to say a mark against you, but it's going to make it that much harder because we're trying to make sure we always have new blood. We also always want to have a balance between practitioners and vendors. You know, it's funny, I think depending on what side of the aisle you're on, we hear vendors say that only practitioners get to speak, and we hear practitioners say that if you're not a vendor, you don't get to speak. We've had vendors say that if we don't sponsor, we're not going to get to speak. None of it's true. It is a completely blind process through the first rounds, and it's only after we kind of whittle it down to the approximately, I think it's about twice as many as slots we have, that we then start looking at those other factors. So without a doubt, the very first thing is you need to have a compelling piece of content that speaks to one of these tracks. I will also say that people tend to want to focus on the beginning stuff. We are actively looking for more advanced topics every year, and so the more advanced a topic, the better chances you are. So, you know, there is no secret sauce. There's no, there's no secret science, no magic sauce to it. I personally, before I joined the board, I submitted 3 times and wasn't selected any time. And I haven't submitted since I've been on the board. There is no rhyme or reason to it from the standpoint of no way to guarantee it. And personally, I think that it is far from perfect, but it is a process that works, and we generally get very high marks for our presentations. So, with that said, I think my information is out here. I'm happy to directly answer any questions if anyone has a concern about why theirs wasn't selected or whatever. I'd be happy to try to help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing was that if someone's paper is not accepted, probably the rejection reasons could help them to understand how to present that paper a little more better next time, because the way a particular author would perceive versus what is the panel discussing might be totally different. At least getting some understanding of the context it was looking might help them to improve their performance next year.
You know, we've talked about it, and we may try. As you can imagine, though, what that means is 420 some odd critiques, and what, at the end of the day, what you have to remember is we have a staff of 3. This is the entire conference selection. I think people forget this is an entirely volunteer-run process. Nobody is on ITSMF or HDI staff. They're all volunteers. Right. And they are, they're practitioners and members of the community just like us that are doing their best to go through this process. So it is definitely challenging. One of the things that we did 2 years ago, and we're talking about bringing back, is a session at Fusion that kind of deconstructs that process. So we're definitely aware of it. We're definitely looking at how we can best do it, but to a certain extent, it is what it is.
Right. Coming final question about ITSMF, and particularly if you've known something about ITSMF India, what are your thoughts for ITSMF India, and how much does it play in terms of cascading these practices? And one of the things that I'm also trying to use is ITSM India podcast as a marketing media to not only bring in the international facet, but also practitioners and people from India
Right.
who could voice and get them into the limelight, right? So what's your perspective from ITSM of India? We're trying hard to build, and probably we get a lot more inspired from ITSM USA and UK and these are pioneers to do that. But what's your thoughts from an ITSM of India perspective, and what would be your vision if something that you could share?
Sure. So the very first thing is I don't think we can understate the importance of a group like ITSMF in India. I think if you look at the world of IT, there's only a handful of major IT operational centers. The U.S. is certainly one. You've got China. You've got some parts in South America, and you got India. Right? There's a massive center of gravity of IT organizations and IT operations that take place in India. I talked about my belief that we're moving into this world of ecosystems, which means it's going to be this highly meshed, highly integrated space. And one of the blessings and the curse of that is that we're going to be as weak as our weakest link in this, and that if we have organizations or entire regions that are and it's not even about ahead or behind, just in a different place or operating differently than elsewhere in the world of IT, it's going to create real challenges. And so I think a group like ITSMF is pivotal to this process for two reasons. One, it provides a vehicle. I mean, certainly within the U.S., one of our major elements of our 5-year vision is to help develop IT service management professionals and IT professionals with the disciplines of service management, which are not actually necessarily the same thing. This idea of how do we bring up the next generation of IT leaders and managers that are conversant and well-educated around service management principles the right way. I think that's vitally critical for a country like India, and that ITSMF India can bring to that. I think secondarily, I think that ITSMF, because it's an international organization, can provide a tremendous amount of act as a glue to bring in some of the lessons, good and bad, that we learn in places like the U.S. or U.K. or Japan, for that matter. Another major, Australia, right? We take our major ITSMF centers and say, what can we learn and what can we feed, both organizationally, but also how does it apply from an individual IT professional, IT organization level? So I think, as our world continues to change and adapt, I think the stakes only get more critical. And I would hope that I would love to see, not that I think we have it all figured out, but I think if you look at, and I'm not even sure how public this is, but if you look at ITSMF USA's 5-year vision, there's a handful of tenets in there. One is this idea of development of the professional. The other is to become the unifier of the industry. Another is this idea of development of programs, the promotion of service management as a platform for growth of business. I think these are universal truths. I think these are things that certainly ITSMF India can take a hold of, and within the within the scope of the world you live in, apply that. And I think that these are universal and have the power to not only certainly make ITSMF a great organization, but truly have an impact on how business is done in India, and vis-a-vis India, the rest of the world.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts and about the universal laws that will help any ITSMF to grow and do. We can talk a lot, Charlie, and I know that you will love talking for hours. But thanks a lot for this particular edition of Sixth. We had some fantastic aspects of what does it take for IT leader in terms of making sure that they are geared up for the change for the future, and also about SM Congress and ITSM Fusion selection. Probably people get some insights from how much it's difficult to get these paper presentations selected, and also your thoughts of ITSM of India. It's been a delight to have you today, and we hope to meet you soon. And until then, have a great rest of the evening.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you guys.
Thank you.